The smell of burning paper mixed with cheap vanilla perfume still haunts me sometimes. Even now, 3 years later, when I catch a whiff of that particular combination, my chest tightens with the memory of standing in Madison's perfectly manicured backyard, watching 18 months of my deepest thoughts curl into ash. Oops, Madison had said. Her glossy lips curved into that practiced smile she'd perfected in 1,000 Instagram selfies. I guess your little diary got too close to the fire pit. The flames licked at the leather binding of my journal, the one I'd carried everywhere since freshman year, filled with story ideas, character sketches, and yes, admittedly, some embarrassingly honest entries about my crush on Tyler Morrison. My hands had trembled as I reached toward the fire, but Brittany's manicured fingers caught my wrist. Careful, Maya, she'd purred. You might get burned. The three of them, Madison, Brittany, and their eternal shadow Chloe, had laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. Like watching someone's dreams literally go up in smoke was peak entertainment. I should have seen it coming. After all, this was my first life, and I was naive enough to think that accepting their invitation to Madison's intimate gathering meant I was finally being included. Instead, it was the night that destroyed everything I thought I knew about friendship, trust, and my place in the social hierarchy of Westfield High. You know what the best part is? Madison had continued, absently stirring the ashes with a gleaming poker. Now no one will ever have to read your weird little stories about vampire cheerleaders and whatever other freaky stuff you write about. But here's what they didn't know about me then. What nobody knew. In my first life, I'd learned that the universe has a funny way of keeping score. And sometimes, if you're patient enough and smart enough, you get a chance to balance those scales yourself. 3 years later, I stood in the green-tinted lighting of the San Diego Convention Center, watching a line of eager readers snake around the Dark Horse Comics booth. The poster behind me featured artwork that had graced the cover of Ember Girls, my graphic novel that had spent 6 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. In the illustration, three perfectly coiffed mean girls cowered as flames erupted around them, their designer clothes catching fire while a figure in shadow stood silhouetted against the blaze. Next! I called out, my voice steady and professional as I signed another copy. The young woman approaching my table had tears in her eyes. This book saved my life, she whispered, clutching her copy of Ember Girls to her chest. I was being bullied so badly I wanted to transfer schools, but reading about Phoenix, about how she turned her pain into power, it made me realize I could fight back too. I smiled, the kind of genuine smile that I'd almost forgotten how to make in high school. What's your name? Jessica. Well, Jessica, I said, uncapping my silver Sharpie. Remember that sometimes the things that hurt us most become our greatest sources of strength. I wrote her name in flowing script across the title page, adding beneath it, "Your story matters. Tell it loudly. Maya Chen." As Jessica walked away clutching her signed copy, I caught sight of a familiar figure hovering near the Marvel booth across the aisle. Madison Hartwell, her once perfect blonde hair now an unfortunate shade of brassy yellow, was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Recognition mixed with something that looked suspiciously like fear. She was thinner than I remembered, wearing clothes that screamed trying too hard, a bodycon dress that was just a little too tight, heels that were just a little too high. The kind of outfit someone wears when they're desperately trying to reclaim a version of themselves that no longer exists. Our eyes met across the crowded convention floor, and for a moment, I was 16 again, watching my dreams burn in her backyard. But then I remembered who I was now. Maya Chen, best-selling author, whose debut graphic novel had just been optioned for a Netflix series. Maya Chen, who had transformed her deepest trauma into art that resonated with millions of readers worldwide. I was no longer the girl whose journal they had burned. I was Phoenix, rising from those very ashes. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. After that devastating night at Madison's house, I'd spent weeks in a fog of humiliation and rage. My mother found me crying in my room 3 days later, surrounded by crumpled papers where I'd tried and failed to recreate the stories that had been lost. "What happened, Butterfly?" she'd asked, using the nickname she'd given me when I was small and obsessed with monarchs. Through hiccuping sobs, I told her everything, about the journal, about the mean girls, about how 18 months of my creative life had been reduced to ash in less than 5 minutes. My mother, who had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but a suitcase full of hopes and a fierce determination to build something better, listened without interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that would change the trajectory of my entire life. Maya, in Chinese culture, we believe that the phoenix is the most powerful of all mythical creatures. Do you know why? I shook my head, sniffling. Because it doesn't just rise from ashes, it creates them first. It burns away everything that no longer serves it. And from that destruction, it becomes something more magnificent than it ever was before. That night, she gave me a new journal, this one bound in deep red leather with a golden phoenix embossed on the cover. Start again, she said simply, but this time, write with fire. And so I did. I began with the story that was burning brightest in my mind. 3 popular girls who discover that their cruelty has awakened something ancient and terrible. In my story, their victim wasn't a helpless teenager crying in her bedroom. She was Phoenix, a girl who had learned to harness the very flames that were meant to destroy her. The first draft was raw, angry, and probably terrible, but it was mine. Every word was forged from my pain, tempered by my fury, and sharpened by my determination to never be powerless again. By senior year, I had evolved the story into something more nuanced. The mean girls became complex characters with their own motivations and insecurities. Phoenix became less about revenge and more about transformation. The flames became a metaphor for the way trauma can either destroy us or forge us into something stronger. When college acceptances came in, I chose Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, where I double majored in illustration and creative writing. My professors were impressed by the raw emotional power of my work, but it was my advisor, Dr. Susan Martinez, who suggested I consider adapting my story into a graphic novel format. Your visual storytelling is extraordinary, she told me during our final semester. But what makes this special is how you've transformed personal trauma into universal truth. This isn't just your story anymore, Maya. It's the story of every girl who's ever been made to feel small. She introduced me to her friend Marcus Webb, an editor at Dark Horse Comics who specialized in finding fresh voices in the graphic novel space. When I pitched Ember Girls to him, his eyes lit up in a way that reminded me why I'd started writing in the first place. This is exactly what the market needs right now, he'd said after reading my treatment and sample pages. Authentic female voices telling stories about empowerment through creativity. When can you have the full manuscript to me? 6 months later, I signed my first publishing contract. 8 months after that, Ember Girls hit bookstore shelves with a marketing campaign that Dark Horse had never undertaken for a debut graphic novel. The timing was perfect. The world was hungry for stories about girls who refused to be victims, who transformed their pain into power. The reviews were better than I'd dared to hope. Publishers Weekly called it a searing exploration of teenage cruelty and creative resilience. The School Library Journal recommended it for every high school library in America. Most importantly, young readers connected with Phoenix's journey in ways that made my heart swell with pride and purpose. But the real validation came 6 months after publication, when Ember Girls hit the New York Times bestseller list. I was sitting in my small apartment in Los Angeles, eating cereal for dinner because I'd been too busy working on the sequel to Grocery Shop properly when my phone rang. Maya? Marcus's voice was barely contained excitement. Are you sitting down? I'm eating Lucky Charms in my pajamas at 7 p.m., so yes, I'm sitting down. We just got word from the Times. Ember Girls debuted at number 7 on the graphic novel bestseller list. I'd dropped my spoon into my cereal bowl, milk splashing onto my laptop keyboard. In that moment, I thought about 16-year-old Maya crying over her burned journal, and I wished I could tell her what was coming. Now at Comic-Con, watching Madison hover uncertainly at the edge of my signing area, I felt a strange sense of completion. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously building toward for 3 years. Not just professional success, but the chance to face my past from a position of unshakable strength. Maya? Madison's voice was smaller than I remembered, lacking the confident projection that used to fill hallways and silence lunch tables. Is that really you? I finished signing the book in front of me, a copy for a teenage boy who reminded me of myself at that age, all awkward angles and desperate hope. before looking up at her fully. Hello, Madison. She shifted uncomfortably, her designer purse clutched against her chest like a shield. I I saw your book in Barnes& and Noble last month. I couldn't believe it was you who wrote it. Believe it, I said simply, capping my pen. The story, it's about, she swallowed hard. It's about us, isn't it? About what happened in high school? I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Gone was the effortless confidence, the casual cruelty that had once made her seem untouchable. In its place was something I'd never seen in Madison before. Vulnerability. It's about a lot of things, I said carefully. Transformation, resilience, the way creativity can heal trauma. Look, Maya, She glanced around nervously as if worried about being overheard. I know I wasn't always nice to you in high school. And I'm sorry about your journal. I was young and stupid. And I didn't realize. You burned 18 months of my work, I interrupted, keeping my voice level. Stories I'd never written down anywhere else. Character sketches I'd spent weeks perfecting. You destroyed something irreplaceable because you thought it was funny. Her face crumpled slightly. I know. God, I know. And I've regretted it every day since. I was so jealous of you, Maya. You had this talent, this passion for something meaningful, and all I had was being popular. Do you know how pathetic that feels now? I studied her for a long moment. This was the confrontation I'd imagined 1,000 times, but it wasn't playing out the way I'd expected. In my fantasies, Madison was still the same cruel, confident queen bee, and I was the one who got to deliver the devastating comeback that put her in her place forever. Instead, I was looking at a woman who seemed genuinely broken by her own choices, and I found that my anger had evolved into something more complex. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of detached understanding. Madison, I said finally, what you did to me was cruel and destructive. It caused me real pain, and it could have ended my creative journey before it began. She nodded miserably. But it didn't end it, I continued. It transformed it. That night in your backyard, you didn't just burn my journal. You burned away every illusion I had about needing your approval or acceptance. You freed me to become exactly who I was meant to be. Her eyes widened. So you forgive me. I considered this. I don't know if forgiveness is the right word, but I'm grateful. Without that night, I never would have written Ember Girls. I never would have discovered that my pain could become my power. So in a weird way, you gave me the greatest gift of my life. Madison was crying now, tears smearing her carefully applied makeup. I don't deserve your kindness. This isn't kindness, I said gently. It's truth. You can't undo what you did, Madison, but you can choose who you want to be going forward. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving black streaks of mascara. I bought your book, she whispered. I've read it 6 times. Phoenix. She's incredible. She's everything I wish I could be. Then be her, I said. Stop being the villain in someone else's story and start being the hero of your own. The line behind Madison was getting restless. I still had dozens of readers waiting for signatures. But I reached into my bag and pulled out a fresh copy of Ember Girls, signing it with care. For Madison, may you find your own flames to rise from, Amaya. She took the book with trembling hands, clutching it like a lifeline. Thank you, she whispered. And then she was gone, disappearing back into the crowd of cosplayers and comic book enthusiasts. The rest of the signing passed in a blur of eager fans, aspiring artists, and heartfelt conversations about the power of storytelling. As the convention center began to empty and the vendors started packing up their booths, I found myself thinking about the strange, circular nature of my journey. 3 years ago, I'd been a powerless teenager whose most precious possessions could be destroyed on a whim by girls who saw cruelty as entertainment. Tonight, I was checking into a 5-star hotel suite, paid for by Netflix executives who wanted to discuss the adaptation of my work. My phone buzzed with a text from my agent. Variety wants to do a feature on you for their Rising Stars issue. Also, we just got an offer from Scholastic for a 3-book middle grade series. Call me tomorrow? I smiled, remembering Dr. Martinez's words about transforming personal trauma into universal truth. Millions of readers had connected with Phoenix's story because it wasn't really about revenge. It was about the alchemy of turning pain into purpose. As I rode the elevator up to my suite, I thought about all the girls who would read Ember Girls and see themselves in Phoenix's journey. The ones being bullied, the ones being overlooked, the ones whose creative dreams were being dismissed or destroyed by people who couldn't understand their power. To them, I wanted to say what my mother had said to me that night 3 years ago. Start again. Write with fire. Let them burn what they think defines you, and then rise from those ashes as something they never saw coming. The Netflix meeting the next morning took place in a gleaming conference room overlooking the San Diego harbor. The executives, 3 women and 1 man, all immaculately dressed and radiating the kind of controlled energy that comes with having the power to greenlight dreams, had clearly done their homework. Maya, said the lead executive, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer Walsh, we've been following the success of Ember Girls since publication. The numbers are incredible, especially in the 16K, 24 demographic. But what really interests us is the emotional authenticity of the story. This isn't just another revenge fantasy, it's about transformation. I nodded, sipping the expensive coffee they'd provided. Phoenix's journey isn't about getting back at the people who hurt her. It's about becoming someone they could never hurt again. Exactly, Jennifer leaned forward. And that's the show we want to make. We're envisioning an 8-episode limited series that explores not just Phoenix's story, but the stories of her tormentors. What makes someone cruel? How do they change? Can redemption be earned? My heart quickened. This was everything I'd hoped for when I first started writing Ember Girls. A chance to explore the complex psychology of teenage cruelty and the possibility of growth and change. We'd want you as executive producer, Jennifer continued, and we'd like you to write the pilot episode. This is your story, Maya. We want to make sure it's told right. As we discussed logistics, timelines, and creative vision, I found myself thinking about Madison again. Her tears yesterday hadn't been performative. They'd been the genuine grief of someone confronting the worst version of themselves. Maybe that was what real redemption looked like. Not a grand gesture of apology, but the quiet, difficult work of becoming better. By the time I left the meeting, I had a development deal that would set me up financially for life, creative control over the adaptation of my work, and a platform to tell stories that mattered to millions of young people struggling with their own bullies and burned journals. That evening, I sat in my hotel room working on the sequel to Ember Girls, tentatively titled Phoenix Rising, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made me answer. Maya? The voice was hesitant, shaky. This is Brittany. Brittany Chen. Brittany Matthews now. Brittany, Madison's lieutenant, the one who'd grabbed my wrist to stop me from saving my journal from the flames. I hadn't thought about her in months. Hi, Brittany. Madison told me she saw you at Comic-Con yesterday. She told me about your book, about what it's about. A long pause. Maya, I need to apologize. What we did to you was unforgivable. I closed my laptop, giving her my full attention. Go on. I've been seeing a therapist, she said, her words coming in a rush. After my divorce last year, I had to confront a lot of things about myself. About the person I was in high school, about the way I treated people I saw as different or vulnerable. And I realized that I spent 4 years of my life being casually cruel to people who never did anything to deserve it. You, especially. You were just this creative, passionate person trying to figure out who you were, and we tried to destroy that because it threatened us somehow. I was quiet for a moment, processing. Why are you calling me Brittany? Because I read your book, all of it. And I saw myself in the character of Frost, the mean girl who follows the leader because she's too insecure to think for herself. The one who realizes too late that her cruelty came from her own fear. Frost was indeed based on Brittany, though I'd given the character more depth and self-awareness than the real Brittany had possessed at 17. In the book, Brittany continued, Frost gets a chance to make amends. She stands up to Blaze, the Madison character, and helps Phoenix when she needs it most. I keep thinking about that scene, about the person I could have been if I'd been brave enough to do the right thing. It's not too late to be that person now, I said. I know, That's why I'm calling. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just wanted you to know that your story, Phoenix's story, it changed something in me. Made me realize that I don't have to be defined by the worst things I've done. After we hung up, I sat staring out at the San Diego skyline, thinking about the ripple effects of storytelling. I'd written Ember Girls to process my own trauma, to transform my pain into something beautiful and meaningful, but in doing so, I'd created something that was helping others, both victims and perpetrators, understand their own capacity for change. The final surprise came 3 days later, after I'd returned to Los Angeles and was back to my normal routine of writing, responding to fan mail, and working with my editor on the sequel. I was at my favorite coffee shop in Silver Lake, working on a particularly challenging scene where Phoenix confronts her past self, when someone cleared their throat beside my table. I looked up to find Chloe Parks, the third member of Madison's crew, the quiet one who'd always seemed more follower than leader. She looked nervous but determined, clutching a worn copy of Ember Girls. Maya, I'm sorry to bother you, but I saw you here and I had to say something. I gestured to the empty chair across from me. Sit. She did, carefully placing the book on the table between us. I've been carrying this around for 2 months, trying to work up the courage to contact you. Madison told me she saw you at Comic-Con, and Brittany said she called you. And now it's your turn? She nodded miserably. I know this might sound crazy, but reading your book, it made me realize that I've been running from that night for 3 years. Every time I thought about what we did to you, I told myself I was just there, that I didn't actually participate. But you did participate, I said gently. You laughed, you watched. You could have stopped it, and you chose not to. Tears welled in her eyes. I know. And the worst part is, I knew it was wrong. Even then I knew. But I was so desperate to belong, to be accepted by Madison and Brittany, that I would have done anything to stay in their good graces. I studied her face, seeing something I hadn't seen in the others. Genuine shame mixed with a kind of desperate hope. Chloe, I said, what do you want from me? I want to do something, she said urgently. Something meaningful. In your book, Whisper, the character based on me, she eventually finds her own voice. She starts speaking up for other kids being bullied. She uses her insider knowledge to protect them. I remembered writing those scenes, imagining what it would have been like if someone in Madison's circle had chosen to be an ally instead of a bystander. I've been volunteering at a middle school, Chloe continued, working with kids who are being bullied. And I keep thinking about your book, about how trauma can become power if you know how to transform it. She opened her copy of Ember Girls to a page near the end where Phoenix delivers a speech to a group of young artists about the importance of telling their stories, no matter how painful. This part, she said, pointing to a highlighted passage, where Phoenix says, your pain is not a weakness. It's raw material. It's the coal that becomes a diamond under pressure. That changed my life, Maya. I felt something shift in my chest. Not quite forgiveness, but recognition. This was what I'd hoped for when I wrote the book, that it would inspire people to become better versions of themselves. What are you asking me, Chloe? I want to start a program, she said, her voice gaining strength, for kids who are being bullied. A creative writing workshop where they can turn their experiences into stories like you did. I want to call it the Phoenix Project. I stared at her, stunned. Of all the outcomes I'd imagined for my story, this hadn't been one of them. I know I don't deserve to use your platform or your story to build something good, she continued quickly. But I thought maybe if we partnered on it, if you helped me design the curriculum, we could help other kids find their voices before they get burned. The irony wasn't lost on me. The girl who had stood by and watched my creative dreams literally go up in smoke now wanted to help other kids protect theirs. But as I looked at Chloe, I saw something authentic in her desire to make amends, something that went beyond guilt into genuine transformation. Tell me more about this program, I said. Her face lit up with hope and excitement as she pulled out a notebook filled with detailed plans, budget estimates, and testimonials from the kids she'd already been working with. As she talked, I found myself getting caught up in her vision. A network of creative writing workshops for bullied kids, a safe space where they could transform their pain into art, where they could learn that their stories mattered. By the time she finished her presentation, I was already imagining how we could expand the program, how we could use the platform of Ember Girls to reach kids who needed to hear Phoenix's message most. "Chloe," I said, "I think we should do this." 6 months later, I stood in a classroom at Roosevelt Middle School, watching 12 kids between the ages of 11 and 14 work on their first creative writing assignments for the Phoenix Project. The prompt was simple: write about a time when someone underestimated you. How did that make you feel? How did you prove them wrong? Or how do you plan to? Chloe moved between the desks, offering encouragement and gentle guidance. She'd thrown herself into the program with the kind of passionate dedication that reminded me of myself at that age. Back when I thought stories could save the world. Maybe they could. "Miss Chen?" A small voice interrupted my thoughts. I looked down to find Maria, a seventh grader, whose classmates had been making fun of the fantasy stories she wrote during lunch. "I finished my piece. Would you read it?" I took her notebook and read about a girl who discovered she could communicate with dragons, who used that gift to protect her village from bullies and oppressors. It was raw, unpolished, but filled with the kind of emotional truth that couldn't be taught. "Maria," I said, "this is incredible. How would you feel about expanding this into a longer story?" Her eyes widened. "You really think it's good?" "I think it's powerful, and I think other kids need to read it." As the session ended and the kids packed up their notebooks, all of them embossed with a small Phoenix logo, a gift from Dark Horse Comics, I felt a deep sense of completion. Not the completion that comes from revenge or vindication, but the completion that comes from turning a wound into a gift. Chloe approached as the last student left. "Thank you," she said simply, "for giving me a chance to be better than I was." "Thank you," I replied, "for proving that redemption is possible." That night, I sat in my home office working on the final chapter of Phoenix Rising. In this book, Phoenix has established herself as a successful artist and is using her platform to help other young creatives find their voices. The mean girls who once tormented her have each found their own paths to redemption, or haven't in the case of those who couldn't face their own cruelty. But the real focus of the sequel wasn't revenge or forgiveness. It was about the ripple effects of trauma and healing, about how one person's decision to transform their pain into art could inspire others to do the same. As I wrote, I thought about that night 3 years ago when Madison, Brittany, and Chloe had burned my journal. At the time, it felt like the end of everything. But it was actually the beginning. The moment when I learned that destruction and creation were often two sides of the same flame. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Walsh at Netflix. "Pilot script is brilliant. Green light for full series." "Congratulations, Maya. You're officially changing the world one story at a time." I smiled, remembering my mother's words about the phoenix creating its own ashes before rising from them. Maybe that was the secret. Not just surviving the flames that others set for you, but learning to kindle your own fire, to burn away everything that no longer served you, and emerge as something more magnificent than you ever imagined possible. The mean girls had burned my journal, thinking they were destroying my dreams. Instead, they had given me the raw material for something greater than any of us could have predicted. They had given me my origin story. And now, sitting in my office surrounded by awards, fan letters, and the first draft of a sequel that would inspire millions more readers, I realized that 16-year-old Maya crying over her burned journal had been right about one thing. Stories really could save the world. They had certainly saved mine. As I typed the final words of Phoenix Rising, I thought about all the kids in Phoenix Project workshops across the country, learning that their pain could become their power, that their stories mattered, that they had the ability to rise from any ashes life might scatter at their feet. The phoenix, after all, was never about the ashes. It was about the rising. And we were all capable of flight.